Good evening. Almost a year ago, I was on a rooftop in the middle of Washington, D.C., covering what was supposed to be a long election night for a tight race. It was actually a clear victory for the Republicans, who got both the House and the Senate, and Donald Trump, yes, was back in the White House. It was not such a big surprise. In a way, we saw it coming, this victory. But at the same time, it was a shock, just 4 years after covering the insurrection on January 6th, just a few blocks away on Capitol Hill. In the following months, my colleagues and I spent a lot of time covering the transition of power, wondering what it would look like, this second Trump presidency. And I could hear the concerns of my colleagues saying, well, maybe we talk too much about Donald Trump. He doesn't really matter to us, the Swiss people. But I still had this very strong feeling that at some point it would impact us. And we didn't have to wait too long. On our national day, on the 1st of August, we got a 39% tariff when the EU only got 15%. How did we get there? Did we do anything wrong? Can we, our government, our diplomats, can we fix it? How can we fix it? How is this going to impact our national economy, but also how are those tariffs going to impact the American economy? And how is it going to change global trade? On a political level, can we still trust the American democracy for the 21st century? Are they a reliable partner? These are some of the questions we're going to ask tonight to Suzi LeVine. Thank you for being here, really. And to our distinguished guests. We're going to have 2 roundtables with politicians, business leaders, and professors, and you're going to be able to join the conversation through our Mentimeter. You will see a barcode, and you can ask questions. And before we really launch the event, I would like to hear a few words from Frédéric Herrmann, the rector of University of Lausanne, and Marianne Schmidt-Mast, the dean of HEC Lausanne. Thank you for having us here tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Gaspard, for this introduction. Good evening, everyone. It's a real pleasure to welcome Ambassador Suzi LeVine to UNIL. I think as an engineer by training, I feel a special connection with your path. I think Suzi began a career in engineering and technology, and she had key roles at JPL, Microsoft, Expedia. And she has followed a journey driven by curiosity, precision, and creativity. What makes a story so remarkable is how she carried an engineering mindset with the conviction that complex problems can be solved with clarity, collaboration, and imagination into the worlds of diplomacy, education, and public service. I think it will be mentioned later, but she played a key role in the election of Barack Obama. As I say, it was probably the good old days. I had the pleasure of meeting Suzi in summer 2024 here in Switzerland, and we had the chance to speak about academia and her ties to the University of Washington and Brown University. And our conversation reminded me how deeply she values universities as engines of innovation and as bridges between knowledge and society. And we're all keenly aware of how much this is needed today. Suzi also embodies the spirit of what Stefan Zweig captured in The World of Yesterday, probably one of the best books ever, according to me, but not only. And I quote him, "The world of truth and spirit knows no national borders." I always say that for science, there is no border. So her career fuses technology, diplomacy, and education, showing us that the pursuit of excellence transcends discipline and borders alike. So Suzi, we are very honored to have you with us. and we look forward to the insights you will share and the conversation you will inspire tonight. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. It's a great pleasure that you're all here tonight for this first edition of what we hope will become an annual flagship event, one that brings together three worlds: the world of science, politics, and economy. Tonight, we turn our attention to the United States, a country whose recent political and economic shifts are reshaping not only its own future, but also ours here in Switzerland. How resilient are our democratic systems? What do these developments mean for our economy, our institutions, and our values? Our goal this evening is not only to reflect, but also to connect, to bring together different perspectives, disciplines, and experiences. We are honored to welcome distinguished speakers, including the US Ambassador Suzi LeVine, and leading voices from academia, politics, and the private sector. May tonight's discussion inspire us all to engage thoughtfully and boldly with the challenges of our time, and to continue building bridges between knowledge and action, between Switzerland and the world. Thank you, and I wish you a stimulating and insightful evening.
I got so excited I wanted to come up on stage earlier.
Suzi LeVine. Suzi, thank you for being here tonight. I know it's a very, very long trip. You've had a very long career in business, government, non-profit. You started as an engineer and businesswoman, worked for Microsoft and Expedia, before becoming US ambassador to Switzerland and Liechtenstein under President Obama in 2014. During your time here, you steeped yourself in our apprenticeship system and gained a passion for workforce and skills development. That led you to lead large agencies in Washington state and then for the United States focused on the dignity of work and inclusion in the workspace. You have also remained very involved in democratic politics at both the local and national level, including serving as Deputy National Finance Chair for the Democratic Party. Today, among other activities, you sit on the board of Publicis Group. You have taught at Brown University and are now teaching at the University of Washington. And you also mentioned your dog.
Yes.
And your family.
Yes, amazing family and 2 poodles. Absolutely. Loving the hiking, living life as much as I can.
So, Suzi, let's start with maybe the main topic tonight, this 39% tariff that Switzerland got. Here it came a bit as a surprise, knowing the relationship we have with the US. From your American perspective, were you also surprised by the result we got here?
I was surprised in terms of Switzerland being so disproportionately high compared to the EU, 15%, or to the UK, 10%. But let's not normalize the 15 or 10%, which themselves are unacceptable in terms of tariff rates. And the random nature of these taxes on Americans that are being asked of us to absorb or of the businesses to absorb. And you, of course, have certain things that are exempt. Gold, certain pharmaceuticals are exempt, various items are exempt, and then some items are at 100% tariff. It doesn't make sense. And raise your hand here if you are an economist, have studied economics, or are studying economics right now. Does this make sense to you? No, it doesn't make sense. So am I surprised? I was surprised that it was 39% because I would argue that Trump would love Switzerland. I know he loves coming to Davos, but it is his whim. And so we actually shouldn't be surprised by the whim of an individual who has not necessarily demonstrated mental stability.
Okay, so that's for the American side. Did the Swiss government do anything wrong, according to you, in the months that preceded this result?
I love that question so much. There's so much embedded in it. One of the things that my husband and I observed when we were here is what we call understated excellence. So let me just digress for one moment. So let's say that this microphone was made in Switzerland, which it probably was. And it's probably the greatest microphone invented of all time. And how a Swiss would describe it as, it's a microphone. The Swiss are so incredibly humble. The fact that you're even posing this question in the form of what did the Swiss do wrong is in and of itself, I would suggest reframing that. And the question to me is, what is Trump jealous of? Or what does Trump want from the Swiss? What does he think he can extract from the Swiss? You have not done anything wrong to receive this punishment. It is bullying, and he sees an opportunity to bully a nation that wants to do good, whose role in the world is as a steward of the rule of law, whose role in the world is to arbitrate and make peace. And so I would not take it on as what could you do better, what could you do right? I think it's how do you maintain your moral focus and the soul of a nation that is dedicated to direct democracy, to civics, and to rule of law, and at the same time figure out a way to dance with the devil.
Are there still people who cherish the role played by Swiss diplomats in favor of American interests? For instance, in Iran, I mean, in Washington, is it still something that people are aware of? Because sometimes we feel that it's not the case anymore.
Well, I think that in past administrations, there absolutely was a recognition and a deep appreciation for Switzerland's role as a protecting power. And I was here when Switzerland stepped out of that role with Cuba, that the United States had them in that capacity, and also when we had a number of detainees released from Iran. And we saw that also during the Biden term and also during Trump 1 happen in that capacity. So Switzerland's role as protecting power is certainly very, very important and recognized. But you're leaning on logic for this assumption of there being a recognition of the value that Switzerland provides. I would argue that the value into which Switzerland may want to lean includes as the largest producer of gold, as a country that does apprenticeship exceptionally well and is the standard. We're now having some construction going on, unless that's Trump coming to get me. And I also think that your business aspects that you have here and the way in which you have many pathways to success are some of your finest attributes that can be a part of a deal with not just the Trump administration, but with the American people. So those are some opportunities. I want to just take 1 second, though. First off, so that people know here, yes, I have the title of ambassador, and I have that title for life. And I would argue that I am the ambassador for the American-Swiss relationship, and I will always be that ambassador. I do not work for the current administration. I am a citizen, and I am here in my citizen capacity. And I think one of the things that's most important right now is that we not normalize the behavior of this administration in so many dimensions, and I personally will not do that. So I'm going to make sure that we have a very, very frank conversation here. And so thank you very much for asking these questions and helping make sure that there is a perspective that people are hearing and seeing that is reflective of a large percentage of people in the United States.
So you were talking about the logic, and maybe we talk too much about the logic in Switzerland. So what is the logic at the moment with this administration? How does it work? How can we recapture its attention? Do we need to buy a jet? Do we need to send invites for Davos? Do we need to create a network of individuals who can reach the presidents? How would you proceed if you were within the Swiss government or within the Swiss diplomats at the moment?
Well, for one, I deeply admire the Swiss diplomats who are having to navigate this. They were trained and came up through a system that, again, generally is dealing in logic. And now they have to think in a much more creative and unusual setting, especially with somebody who has written a book about his ability to con and grift. And that is anathema to the Swiss people and to the Swiss ethos. So I would look at what are, again, some of the strengths that you all have. Here are some examples. As you all may know, and as was shared, I am a deep admirer and have tried to become an expert in the Swiss apprenticeship model. Trump got a lot of his visibility through the show The Apprentice. And he thinks of himself as the ultimate apprentice. How might that be an opportunity? How might Switzerland provide the gift of apprenticeship to the United States and thereby benefit and provide the American people with the future of work? Is there a way to collaborate with business, labor, philanthropy, and other entities to really bolster the American apprenticeship system, which lags behind demonstrably the Swiss model, but admires it deeply? That's one way. Another thing to do is to not just focus on the federal relationships, but to also focus on subnational relationships. So here we are in Canton Vaud, right? What if Canton Vaud built sister relationships with Virginia, with West Virginia? What if Neuchâtel built relationships with New Jersey and Nebraska? And in those relationships defined economic, academic, social relationships, cultural relationships, and started building those because, as was mentioned before, it's a question of, can the Americans be trusted? You can trust Suzi LeVine, you can trust me, but right now you can't trust our government. So how do you both do two things? One is make sure that the Swiss people and the Swiss government get what they need, but also build a platform for the future. And I think we're going to, on a global basis, need to rethink, what do global relationships look like? What do treaties look like?
If we come back just to the goals of those policies, I mean, Donald Trump is claiming he wants to create more jobs, more investments in the US. Can it work, this policy, according to you?
He's saying it, but he's not doing it. So there were a lot of pieces of legislation passed during the Biden era, the CHIPS and Science Act, for example, that has been decimated and that is not basically moving forward, and that was generating jobs. Right now, with the big ugly bill that he produced, he is, one of the key elements of that is to decimate the Affordable Care Act. And what that is doing is now leaving many people across primarily red states without health care. Or another example is with the shutdown that is entirely Trump-induced. Individuals across the United States, starting November 1st, are not going to receive what's called supplemental nutrition assistance. That program called SNAP is food stamps. There are people who are going to be starving as a result of not receiving this food assistance. And many of those people are not, they're not destitute individuals. They are working. It's just that they are working and they don't have enough money to make ends meet. So he is decimating that workforce. So he is not fulfilling the commitment that he made. And I want to go back for a moment to 2020. The research that was done to understand what messaging would finally land, because nothing was sticking to Donald Trump in 2020, nothing. If you said Donald Trump is a liar, Donald Trump is a this, Donald Trump is a that, the voters who had supported him when he was elected in 2016, which was not a majority of people, but he won the election with the most votes, they would say, if you said to them, Donald Trump is awful, they took that very personally, as if you were accusing them of being awful. The only thing that landed in 2020 was saying to them, I understand your decision and I hear you, but he has not fulfilled his commitment to you. He has been ineffective. So we are in a similar spot right now where he is being ineffective. And what we are definitely doing, not just as a party, but as a whole democratic ecosystem, is documenting that ineffectiveness and that decimation of our economic system, our government system, our health system, and our cybersecurity and safety systems.
I mean, when you describe those programs, I'm thinking about all those MAGA people I interviewed along the road, and a lot of them were not making such big amounts of money. A lot of those people were relying on those programs. Can it affect his electoral base at some point, these policies that you just described?
Over time, I believe it will. He's got many people in his thrall, meaning mesmerized and magnetized by him. He is very charismatic, and people are believing in him almost in a cult-like way. So those individuals have the faith. But there is a very large percentage of people who just bought into the con. And unfortunately, they are now being let down. So take the Latino community as an example, where Latino men voted primarily for Trump. They are seeing their neighbors, their family members themselves being caught up in ICE raids, whether or not they are US citizens. If they are brown, they are getting caught up in these raids. And they are realizing that that is not the program that they signed up for. That is not the program for which they voted. And we are seeing a shift in the polls with regards to their satisfaction and their adherence and their obedience to Trump, which is encouraging in that sense, but they don't yet have faith that there is an alternative to provide them with what they want and need, and that is part of what needs to happen in the coming elections.
What about the Republicans? I mean, historically, they were the party of big business, free trade. Is there any resistance to those tariffs in Congress, for instance? Or are they just obeying the president at the moment?
Right now, it is mostly they are obeying the president. There are a couple of really interesting indicators that I would encourage you to look at, both past and upcoming. From a past standpoint, so there are 3 individuals in the House who are in seats that are Republicans, but that Kamala won those districts. They are in Nebraska, New York, and Pennsylvania. And those 3 legislators have actually gone against Trump a number of times in their voting decisions and in their statements. Ukraine is a perfect example that a number of them have gone against Trump in terms of their support of Ukraine. Another example is that those individuals who have decided to not run again for office, they too, like Cornyn in Texas, have started to go against Trump and some of his decisions and or some of his nominees. So we are seeing that there is some of that. When you look at the elections since Trump became president on what would be the equivalent of a cantonal or a communal level, there have been 45, and on an average, they are performing ahead of the 24 elections by 16%. Let me emphasize that. 45 elections at 16% ahead of where the 24 elections were. If 2026 elections were to happen now, and the tide rose by even just 9 points, not 16 points, 22 Republicans would lose their jobs. If it rose by 14 points, 43 Republicans would lose their jobs. So as we see more electoral pressure, we will be able to break the spell because they want to retain their seats more than they may want to listen to the president, and ideally also then attract more competitive and interesting candidates in more districts across the United States. One other point I'll point to is in Iowa. In Iowa this past September, there was an election for a state senator, and that district had been won by Trump and by the Republican in 2024 by 11%. A Democrat won it by 10%, so it swung 21 points. 2 days later, the senator from Iowa, Joni Ernst, decided she wasn't going to run for office again. So those are some of the things that give me tremendous hope and optimism for what we can do. And so keep an eye. Next week, we have very big elections on November 4th in Virginia and New Jersey. And those will be bellwethers. And then on November 5th, keep an eye out on the Supreme Court for the hearing about tariffs. And we will get an indication of will they continue their support of the president or will they continue their support of the American people? We'll hear it in their questions on November 5th with regards to tariffs. We won't get their decision right away, but we will get an indication of how they're feeling.
What about the grassroots movements? We know how important it is with the Democrats. What do you see on the ground?
It's so exciting. I was there actually on the ground on October 18th in Seattle. We had almost 100,000 people gathered at our No Kings rally. And across the United States, 7 million people from big blue cities to small red towns. People gathered in the largest peaceful protest in American history. And what's happening now, that's twice as many as showed up in July, which is twice as many as showed up in June. And what we are seeing is we're turning this moment into a movement. And, you know, kudos to the French. The French know how to protest. We could take a page from their playbook. And they know how to strike, especially on days that I need to travel. And we in the United States need to do a better job at this. And we're starting to get our training. We're starting to get our momentum going. And we have some amazing grassroots leaders doing that. And what that does is it tells people who are in these red communities, and I shouldn't call them red communities, in communities where there hasn't been enough contact with Democrats who might share their values, helping them know they're not alone. And that's really one of the keys, is pointing out that we share a destination. We may disagree on the path, but we know that we want to go to the same place together. And so it's a matter of helping humanize and engage with people all across the country.
Well, from a Democrat's viewpoint, it's great what I hear, but is the system, the democratic system, still solid enough in the US? I mean, you were mentioning the Supreme Court. At the moment, it's sidelining very often with the president and giving more and more power to the executive branch of governments. I mean, can we trust the system right now?
You're absolutely right to question where we are. However, a couple of things. There have been about 400 cases that have been decided against the administration at the lower court levels. The Supreme Court hears very few cases, and even they're utilizing something that's very technocratic called the shadow docket for some, but most things don't actually ever reach that level. So most cases, and it's been interesting, I actually had in my class a federal judge last week who talked about they don't see themselves as a Bush judge, a Clinton judge, a Reagan judge, a Trump judge. Because they have these lifelong appointments, they just see themselves as judges. And many, if not most of them, are actually deciding in favor of the people and democracy instead of in favor of Trump. So you're right that that is shaky, but it has not fallen. And similarly with our Congress, right now it is shaky. They have abdicated their responsibility. Their responsibility is tariffs. And they have abdicated that. Their responsibility is budget. They have abdicated that. However, they also feel the hot breath on their neck from Democrats who have had over 150 town halls in Republican districts, meeting with their constituents, listening to them, hearing their issues, and making those relationships deeper and more significant. So I have faith that we will come out of this stronger. And I'll just take a moment. It is not easy to be an American right now, but it is incredibly important to be an American right now. And have any of you ever read a history book about American history? Raise your hand. Or any books related to that? Right? In those stories, you read about the American Revolution. You read about the Civil War. You read about the civil rights movement. None of those movements were, let's go have pumpkin pie and eat lollipops and ice cream. They were really hard, convulsive moments in our democracy, and we came out better. We are at that type of pivot point in our history right now. And myself and those 6,999,999 people know that we actually are holding the pen right now and writing this chapter in history. And we have a choice. Are we going to write it or are we going to get back on the couch and play more Nintendo? And fortunately, I believe we're going to write it.
One of the things that struck me in the US covering those stories was how divided the society is. Even among families, you have people who don't talk to each other anymore. And I was always telling the Republicans and Democrats that they actually had more in common than what they thought, because I was going from one to the other. How did you end up in such a divided society? And it's also being reinforced by the bubble effect of the social media, of course. But what can we learn in Switzerland, where we have a direct democracy, about this great divide, not to end up that way, if I may?
I so deeply appreciate it. There's a book that I once read called The Big Sort, not to be confused with The Big Short. The Big Sort. And it talks about people sorting themselves into different locations, and we're seeing that even more substantially now into red states and blue states and these types of things. And I can ascribe it to social media. I can ascribe it to many different outside forces. But I also think it's getting a huge assist from those in power who want to drive that divide and who gain power from that divide. And this isn't new. This has happened for eons. This is part of what happened during the Civil War and Andrew Jackson wanting to make sure that after that Civil War, he regained power. So what did he do? He had poor whites start to hate poor blacks. And so this is a phenomenon that happens again and again, and not just in the United States. But right now, the accelerant on it is technology, is dangerously, that if we don't manage to figure out a way through it, AI could really exacerbate this, and is trust, and a betrayal in trust. And how can you trust these resources? And so I think that why we are so divided is because we are feeling unsure. An individual is saying, I'm not going to do as well as my parents, and my kids are going to do even worse than I am. And our systems, and I happen to have the benefit when I worked for the government more recently, I ran some of these social safety net systems. And they were designed in 1935, and they aren't doing the job they need to do. And so people are vulnerable in ways that, frankly, Democrats didn't address. And instead of saying, I agree, the systems are broken, Democrats went into a defensive crouch in protecting status quo. And that made us even more vulnerable. And so what we need to do is to come out of this with a vision of not 1935, but 2035. And how do we collaborate with our global partners to figure out a new way forward and not say, trust me, take my word, because you're not gonna, but rather, let me show and demonstrate what we can do together.
Well, you're talking about trust. I mean, one of the big questions in Switzerland, but also among other European states at the moment, is, can we trust the United States? I mean, these 39% tariffs coming out of nowhere, with a country we have a very strong relationship with. We actually work for the United States sometimes on some issues. We were mentioning Iran. Can we trust the United States as a stable partner, a reliable partner for the years to come? I mean, we have the word of a Democrat, but this is a two-party system. I mean, it goes back and forth. How can we trust you?
You can't. Seriously, trust but verify, right? I mean, that's going to need to be going forward. Trust but verify. And what we're going to need to do is to design a system. So let's take, actually, after the Obama administration, there were a couple of agreements that were in place and or in motion that Trump completely pulled out, the Paris Agreement being one, the Trans-Pacific Alliance in Asia being another. The Paris Accord and pulling out of that means that we now, 1.5 degrees would be dreamy, right? We are far in excess of that globally. The Trans-Pacific Alliance, we complain all the time about China. Well, if that had been in place, there wouldn't be as much power that China wields currently in that space. So we're seeing the outcomes from those dramatic and drastic decisions to pull out of those. So the United States, to be able to have more agreements or to be able to work with others, maybe we're going to need to figure out different ways to codify agreements. Maybe we're going to need to change some of our democratic systems. So I think that what Switzerland can learn from that or observe with that is a blend of all right, what sort of verification do you need? And again, with whom can you build those relationships that will be more durable? But in terms of the tariffs and the 39% tariffs, just to remind you, Switzerland had 50% tariffs on watches from the United States in the 1950s and found a way forward. And some of that was diversifying, some was upscaling, and some was figuring out a path forward. And you know what? We'll work through this.
So we have some questions from the audience. I want to jump into that, and maybe we can make short answers so we can take as many questions as we can just for the next 10 minutes.
Speed round.
Yes, speed round. Can it be argued that the Trump administration as a whole is responsible for these tariffs decisions, or is it more accurate to see them as a product of the Republican Party of Trump himself?
It's both. If Congress had had a spine and taken action, then Trump's tariff actions would not have actually followed through. So his decision and their willingness to accept it and let it go makes them all complicit.
Well, should Switzerland and the EU oppose Trump's approach or accept the reality and learn to live with it?
Well, I think they have to live with it because it exists right now, and depending on what happens with the Supreme Court next week. But I don't know what learn to live with it means other than figuring out a way to manage a change in business structures, diversify, build markets elsewhere. Unfortunately, the Chinese market is not doing so well either to be able to absorb that. But my understanding is that right now 10% of Swiss exports are affected by the tariffs, and that the United States market represents about 18.6% of the Swiss exports overall. So it's a large percentage, but not enormous. And frankly, from a tariff standpoint, it's mostly being absorbed by Americans in the United States. So I would say that a lot of it also needs to be how to encourage Americans to speak up against, tariff is such a lovely word. It's such a soft word. It's a tax. It is not a tariff. It is a tax on every American. And people are really starting to feel it now.
Oh, do they? Do they
Absolutely.
feel it?
When you start to look at what people are trying to buy for the holidays, things like that, a lot of the supply that has been run through at this point, absolutely, people are starting to feel it.
We have a forward-thinking question. Where would you like to see the post-Trump United States heading, politically, economically, and in terms of values? So that's the question they are asking. I'm asking, where do you see it going post-Trump? Maybe not wishful thinking, but where do you see it going?
Well, unless he's in formaldehyde, he's going to go away at some point.
Really?
There is the singularity. So in terms of, there will be a post-Trump time. And I know that there's that separate conversation that we have had and that a number of people have asked me about the recent claims on a third term. We'll cover that separately. But in terms of what a world after Trump looks like, I'm actually very encouraged. There are a number of different organizations that are working on an affirmative agenda, or what are the different social safety net solutions that we need? How do we consider a very different environment than we had in 1935 in terms of our social safety net? What do we need to do with technology and AI? What does diplomacy look like? Trump has canceled foreign service exams. We are no longer bringing in new foreign service officers. But the foreign service exam that we had was decades old. What does a new one look like? And it is not sufficient to say we're just going to rebuild. No, rebuild, not an option. And this is not original to Suzi LeVine. We have a number of amazing voices out there, like Pete Buttigieg talks about this. We cannot be apologists for status quo, and we cannot offer to build it back. What we need to do is to build anew and have a phoenix rising out of the ashes across the board.
I was only half kidding when I was wondering if he was going. I mean, what about the third term? Is it something that is, it's an idea that seems to be growing?
We can't let it grow. Don't give it oxygen. Don't give it water. Don't let it grow. Otherwise, it's going to be like bamboo, which just gets everywhere. Anybody with a garden with bamboo knows what I'm talking about. He puts out a lot of ideas. as does his compatriot Steve Bannon. And part of why they are doing that is both to distract from other things that they're doing, but also to normalize those ideas so that people just accept them as a fait accompli. It is not normal. It is against the 22nd Amendment. It is against the law. We do not have kings in the United States, and we do not have presidents with a third term. And all of those who are not enthralled to Trump will fight against this with our protests, with our courts and our legal systems, and with our votes, most importantly. And so it is going to be through those means that we fend off Trump's action. And Steve Bannon did actually say something accurate. He said that if Trump is going to have a third term, it's because the people want him to have a third term, and he's right. If the American people do choose next year in 2026 to retain a Republican House of Representatives, that would be a very specific choice, and it would be in favor of authoritarianism. So.
An interesting question, and that would be the last one before we have the first roundtable.
Okay.
These tariffs, they are also a way to get leverage for Donald Trump, to negotiate other things. So the question is, what does Donald Trump want from Switzerland? What does he want from us?
A new Rolex? No, I'm kidding. Maybe. I don't think he knows what he wants from Switzerland. But a couple things that you have. Again, you have gold, you have apprenticeship, you also have Davos. He loves a stage, right? So what is the opportunity for a stage? You also have a lot of places where you make peace. He wants a Nobel Peace Prize. Is there some way for you all to help him make more peace? I am not in his head, thank God. And so I can only conjecture. But what please, please, please do not do not sell your soul. Do not sell your soul. Do not change your moral center. Do not give in to the bully. And do not pay the hostage taker. And please, please, please know that you have so much to give the world, and there is so much of the world there. We are here and we will be there with you and for you long into the future, even if this president is not.
Thank you so much. We have the first roundtable now, so I'll ask the people to join us. Please.
I'm going to move this over here to get some water closer. How's everybody feeling out there right now? Upbeat? Come on. Woo! And the sun came out today for this.
So we have Laurent Verly, good evening. You are a radical liberal, a member of the National Council in Bern, where you preside over the Foreign Affairs Commission. So you know a lot about the topic. Samuel Bendaon, you are also a member of the National Council. You are the co-leader of the socialist group within the federal chambers, and you also teach at HEC Lausanne Leadership and Management. And finally, Marius Brulart, you are professor of economics at HEC, and among many other topics, you study trade. So, Laurent Verly, I would like to start with you, maybe. How do you assess the performance from the Swiss government in the past few months and our diplomats to end up with this 39% tariff?
So good evening, everybody. Great pleasure to be again with Suzi and my colleagues. I think that we can't say that is a great performance because we have 39%. But the reality is, as usual, more complex. By example, at the end of June, the federal government, by the two representatives, the president and the minister of economy, Mrs. Kalasuta and Mr. Parmano, were in Washington, D.C., they negotiate with 3 ministers of US government, directly involved about this question of the custom rights. And they finished the day, that was a Friday, with an agreement with 10%, like Great Britain. After that, the federal government organized a special meeting the Monday morning. They confirmed what the 2 members have negotiated. That was normal. And after that, that was what the process they decided with the 3 ministers, US. They sent a message to these 3 ministers, okay, we have the agreement of the federal government with what we decided Friday. And the 3 ministers said, okay, we give that today to the President Trump with our agreement of the 3 ministers. And don't speak to anybody because the president wants to say that to the media, to the press, in the perhaps tomorrow or 2 or 3 days after. After that, 3 weeks and a half, 1st August, and the president said 39%. And 3 days after, that was also a Friday, and Monday in Fox News, after a question, he said, oh, no, my 3 ministers don't know what is important for the US. I know that was because I said 39%. The 10% is absolutely not a good treaty with a good agreement with Switzerland. So we can't say that is a good result because the result is 39%, but as negotiation, we had a treaty with 10% written, but not decided, or decided by the people who don't have the capacity to decide, because the president wants to be the unique with his team. And when Suzi LeVine answered some minutes before about the administration, the minister of US, she's completely right. She's a part of the decision, but the real decision is the President Trump and his team. The question is, what have we to do now to search a solution with him?
So if I follow you, it's not the usual channels that we need to use. How can we operate then?
We have to continue to negotiate and to have contact with the ministers, because after that, these 3 ministers didn't want to have any discussion with Switzerland because they were not gratified in Fox News by their president. And that was because at the end of August, because perhaps you saw that, the Minister of Commerce in another channel said, no, Switzerland is not a capacity to have a good deal with us. But last week, or 2 weeks ago, the Minister of Economy was in Washington, D.C. for the World Bank meetings, and he have a meeting, a special meeting with the Commerce Secretary, so Minister of Economy, and they are convinced that they can search a solution, but at this moment we don't know exactly which solution. Because the question, and Suzi has that very well said, we have a lot of good arguments. We are the 6th country in the world who have more invested in US. We are the Swiss firms now in USA have more than 600,000 100% post employer. We are working for the diplomacy in Iran, by example. But all these elements were decided in a time where President Trump was not president. And President Trump don't like to say, oh, wonderful, what we have done with Switzerland, because it's not, oh, what is wonderful, what I have done with Switzerland. And that's a great difference between a normal diplomacy work who is in link with the president, the administration, the period, the legislature, and so and so. He wants to say to his people, his electors, oh, see how great I am, because I have that from Swiss. The second element who is very important is to work with some part of the economy who are inside USA very linked with these 39%. Because I'm sure that President Trump have much more to listen to some people Trump's chiefs and so, who are inside US, perhaps they have paid for his campaign. And when they say something to him, he's much more listening than to listen a Swiss member of government or parliament. Just an example, the gold history. The 1st of August, the 39% was also for the gold who are coming from Switzerland. But Sunday evening, on Truth Media social network, President Trump said, no, that was a mistake for someone who are working in the custom service. Sorry. Sure, gold are coming from Switzerland with 0% for custom whites. What between Friday and Sunday? The team of the COMEX, the exchange place for the gold in New York, said to the president, are you sure you want that? Because if you continue to do that, we have to move the COMEX outside the States. And that's a great problem for you, for the administration, and for the fees and the tax we pay for you. And remember that we pay something for your campaign. That was what he has between Friday and Sunday with such decision. But we don't have for everything. We don't have for the watches or for the chocolates or for the cheese the same result as for gold. But we have to work for these elements.
I'd like to hear you, Samuel Mendao, about the same question about this negotiation strategy from the Federal Council and the diplomats. How do you see it? What is your take on that?
So I'm going to immediately answer your question. Before that, I really need to say something to you all. When I first met Suzi LeVine, which means today, I told her I had great expectations. I needed a bit of hope. And I really would like to thank you because you actually really gave that to me. And I'm impressed to see how it's still possible to find a way. And for us in Switzerland, this is something very important. Because the answer to your question, am I happy with what has passed? One part of the answer is that I know that there are people fighting in the United States so that in 2 years and in 4 years, it's extremely different. And maybe part of the answer to that question is we need to know that at least in part, we'll have to weather the storm. Now, am I happy? Absolutely not. And here's the reason. In her conclusion, Suzi LeVine said, there's one thing we should not do. We should not sell our soul to the devil. Our opinion on this strategy, and I'm not talking about how our president actually handled the negotiations. I'm talking about the actual strategy, how it was thought at the beginning, was a bit too much on the side of trying to sell our soul to Trump to get a better deal than the others. And yes, it's failed. But I'll never criticize our president because the strategy failed. I'll always criticize our government because I think from the start that was the actual wrong strategy. Yes, I know it's not clear-cut and easy. Yes, I know that we cannot just throw our economy through the window. But the reality is that today we have the worst of both worlds. We tried to submit to Trump, we failed, and we got one of the worst tariffs. If that's not a failure, then I don't know what is. So what we should have done, or what we thought we should have done more, is when we know that basically Trump's decision on the tariffs can be considered basically as a random process, we need to make sure that we are way stronger in all the relationships that are way stabler. And I particularly liked, of course, I'm thinking of the European Union, of course, but not only that, I really liked also this insight that we should work more with the states who are way more ready to cooperate with their industries. And I think there's a lot of options in this way.
Do we need to gain more leverage? For instance, the F-35 has been quite a big debate in Switzerland. You were telling me on the phone maybe taxing a bit of the GAFAM. What about that? I mean, should we be a bit stronger in the relationship, in the conflict in a way?
I do have a belief. I think the Swiss people would answer yes to the question just because they want to retaliate. I think that's a feeling that a lot of Swiss people have today. I think that we're not a global power, and our ability to hurt the other in a retaliation is actually extremely low. So doing something just for the sake of retaliating and hurting the other will not really work, at least not alone, because I believe we can do it together with others. That I'm convinced, but alone, no. So why do I think that the answer to your question is nonetheless yes? I think that we should take any measures that we should have taken anyway. This F-35 strategy, defense strategy within the EU, with the US, which is unstable, is from the start a problematic strategy. This idea where we tolerate organizations like the GAFAM, who can earn millions and millions of profits and yet not be taxed in our country, is from the start a problem. So for these reasons, and not to retaliate, but for these specific reasons, we should do that, yes. However, I do think that Switzerland, as also a motor for human rights, for our values that are very important to us, instead of trying to get a better deal in front of our partners, the EU, should be together with the others, starting a way to resist for other countries. Anything that with others we can do to resist against this and the rises of far-right and neo-fascism, anything we can do against that. Anything we can do also to help the people show how problematic these policies are from within the US. Any argument we can give to the people of the United States to see, remember how it was before, when we had Obama, when we had Biden, and how we were admired in the world, and see how it is today, what Trump has destroyed. Anything we can show like that, I think it's not a lot, but I think it can help, yes.
Maybe, yeah, you want to react.
I just wanted to talk to 2 points. One is what happened recently with San Francisco is a really good lesson. So Trump was planning to send troops to San Francisco, but the technology oligarchs there talked to their buddy Trump, and he is no longer sending troops to San Francisco. He's not even threatening to do that, to your point, Laurent. And then in terms of your point, Sami, there's this point in safety in numbers. And to the extent that Trump is sort of trying to pick off where is the weakness and who are the entities who may acquiesce to my requests, there's an opportunity to not capitulate. And there are some good examples now in the United States with universities, where many of the universities invited to start to cooperate more with the administration have declined the invitation. In addition to that, there was a request by the Pentagon for media to basically adhere to their requirements for media coverage, and the media walked out en masse, including Fox News. So I think that your point is so salient about what can and should be done on a global basis, and Switzerland plays such a critical role in that convening. Here we are just an hour away from Genève, and where so many of those conversations take place, and we have somebody who is now generating human rights violations. So I think that there's an opportunity for Switzerland to hold us accountable in the United States, and that you will find a lot of allies from within.
Maybe Laurent Verly on this idea of bargaining and having a bit more leverage, being slightly more aggressive with the American governments. What is your view on that? Is it a good idea or is it actually nonsense?
I think it's a good idea. I share for some elements what Samuel Bendaron said. By example, the GAFAM. We can take the opportunity. Mr. Trump said always, I want the same custom rights. We have to have the same custom rights. Okay, so put 39% of Swiss custom rights on the GAFAM process and the products. Why not? I show that it's a problem for a lot of Swiss firms who are buying such elements. But perhaps before to do that, just to study that, search the result, and say to the chief and of the directors of these firms, okay, if you do that, it's that problem for you. Because I'm convinced in such element that we have to work together. Alone, we have to say that. I'm very proud of my country, but we are 9 million inhabitants. And we are a good country, so for Mr. Trump, that was a good opportunity to say, oh, see what I have done to Switzerland. They have to abide to me. That's what Mr. Trump want to say. So if we organize the process and said, okay, GAFAM, if we put 39% in Switzerland, the result is that for you. And if these directors phone to Mr. Trump, oh, Mr. Trump, be careful, we have to share this question with you, and we have to find a middle or another solution that these 39%. Because, again, I'm sure that Mr. Trump have much more capacity to listen people who put money in his campaign and are inside the US than perhaps some people from Switzerland. But we have to work together. We have to share. One of our values, so important, we do what we say and we say what we have done. And we are not using the capacity to lie or to search pretty lie elements. By example, Mrs. von der Leyen from the European Commission have a great capacity to convince Mr. Trump to something. That was, okay, we want to buy energy from the US. And Mr. Trump was very happy because after that he can say, oh, see, my friends from the petrol and the gas of US, what I have done. I negotiate 275 billions of US dollar of energy for the next 5 years. Wonderful, I'm the greatest. One first problem, Mrs. von der Leyen have no capacity to negotiate any energy buying because in the European Commission is not a capacity, a task of the European Commission, is the task of each country. But that was organized with the energy minister of all the countries. Second element, the amount of energy they decided together is five more than what Europe needs as energy for the next 5 years. So we are sure that in 5 years they don't need such elements and they don't pay for that. But that's not so important at this moment of the negotiation. As in Switzerland, we don't do such negotiation. Perhaps we have to learn.
I would like to hear you, Marius Brulart. If these tariffs stay, what will be the impact on the Swiss economy, according to you?
This isn't according to me, but this is according to eminent colleagues at the ETH Zurich who've done the numbers, and their central estimate, their latest estimate, is that it would cost the Swiss economy around 0.6% of GDP. What does that mean? That means if the pain were spread equally among all of us, it would mean every single one of us will be 500 francs poorer going forward, thanks to this decision by President Trump. Obviously, this is not how it would be because the losses will be much more concentrated on a small number of industries, on workers and owners of the firms in those industries. Many of us would not notice very much, but just to give an order of magnitude. So it would be non-negligible, but it would not necessarily be enough, for instance, to turn the Swiss economy into a recession.
Still from your economist's viewpoint, this policy from Donald Trump, those tariffs, do they make any sense when he says it's going to create jobs, attract investments in the US, in those poor states, in the Midwest? Does it make any sense economically? Could it work, basically?
A short answer is no. A longer answer is one thing as economists we thought we've understood, and I continue to believe that we have understood it since Adam Smith more than 250 years ago, is that international trade is win-win. So both parties, both countries, on the whole win. There may be losers within countries, but the gainers gain more than the losers lose within each country. So that means that if these tariffs make us into losers, to the tune of 0.6% of GDP, the US also will be losers on the whole, because if free trade is win-win, then protectionism is lose-lose. Now, the official narrative by President Trump is to say, yeah, but we're going to have a re-emergence of these former manufacturing industries that have been partly decimated by competing imports, mainly from China, in the last 30 years. But this is an illusion. Firstly, he doesn't even mean it. And what makes me say that, it's not that I can, like you, Ambassador LeVine, I can't see into his mind, and I'm glad I'm not there. But you can, we talk of revealed preferences in economics, and if he really wanted to save the manufacturing base, what would he do? He would put high tariffs on finished goods and low tariffs. He'd actually lower tariffs on the inputs, the raw materials. But what has he done? He's done the opposite. He put high tariffs on steel and aluminium and input goods, and actually, in many cases, lower tariffs on the final goods. So his actions don't match his stated motivation. And even if he had done it right, in inverted commas, even if he had put higher tariffs on final goods than on inputs, it still wouldn't work, because there's basically not a reserve army of unemployed manufacturing workers waiting to take up these jobs. What would happen would be inflation, and there would be a lack of workers in other sectors in which the US has a much stronger competitive position, mainly in services.
Maybe a question for everyone. There is this understanding that those tariffs are just going to last the Trump presidency. But what we saw with the tariffs on China last time, it actually, President Biden kept some of those tariffs in place. Could we imagine a world or a United States where actually the next president, maybe even a Democrat, would keep those tariffs because they actually bring money and they work not that badly for the US economy. They don't impact so much inflation and jobs and so on. Is that impossible?
You're looking at me. I can't predict the future in terms of somebody saying, gosh, wouldn't it be nice to have more revenue? But like I said, I actually think that this is an opportunity to rethink some of our economic foundations and economic systems. We have too many instances where we have a regressive tax system in the United States, and so many promises over decades to reform and simplify our tax code. And so I would argue that there should just be a larger examination of what are we doing in terms of getting people to a quality of life. And having been a part of some of those conversations that are happening at think tanks and other entities with various experts and former and current leaders in this space, I think that there are going to be a lot of deep questions, but I don't think that they include disparate, whimsical tariffs. Sorry, whimsical makes it sound lovely. No, it is not whimsical. Disparate, random tariffs to different countries. And it would include people who can actually do math. So that would be a huge advantage to where we are today in that sense.
What about you? Is it a fear to see those tariffs actually kept in place?
I'm not sure that we conduct good when we have fear. We have to think about all these elements and to work on. What I can say, I'm sure that a new president could certainly have another style and another tone. And that's so important when we have good negotiation possibilities. But the custom rights for the politics in the States are much more something who every part said it could be good for the US economy and the US government. I just say an example. This summer we have a officially secret meeting with Republican and Democrats, members of the Congress and the Senate. I said normally secret because the same days that was in the press and the television was outside the door of the meeting room, but that's all. So I can explain that tonight. And that was very interesting to have this discussion. They were really from the two parties and in Senate and Congress. No one, absolutely no one said, I'm against the custom rights. But everyone was very shocked for the 39% for Switzerland. As you said, Why Switzerland 39 and Great Britain 10 and EU 15? That's the unique question, and the style and the possibility to negotiate. But no one said, I'm against such, not 39, but the idea of custom-wide. So I think that we have to deal with that and to search absolutely the solution to be like the other countries, especially our neighbors, and not with such difference.
What about you, Samuel Bednao?
Yeah, in general, I'd say I don't know, and I have no idea, and of course I don't really know. But I have a hunch, and I'd like to share it. And the hunch is the following. I was particularly moved by one thing, this idea that there are moments, some kind of these famous tipping points, where it can go one way or the other. And I really think that the one way or the other is not tariff or no tariff. It's further into this authoritarian oligarch society without democracy and also, honestly, without rationality, or it's back somewhere else. And I really, really believe that if we convince, well, I don't know if I can say we, but if you convince the American people with a lot of other people together that this is not the way, Trump is not the way, irrationally is not the way, then what is going to replace Trump? I don't think that somebody who is not radically different from what we're seeing now has a real chance of being that hope. That I don't believe. So I do think that the person who replace will be more like Obama in terms of the hopes, the way to govern, the way to think. When you listen to Obama or to some other people who were in this vein, we can agree or not agree with them, but there are people who have some deep level of thought and rationality in what they say. And I think in this case, we need to listen to what Marius Brulat said. And if we do bring back rationality, democracy, a bit of benevolence in the next government, because I think it's the only thing that can win, then in that case, maybe there will be a bit of tariffs, but certainly not this madness that we're living today. I'm quite sure that the situation in Switzerland will be way easier to solve, at least the most crazy part. Maybe some of the tariffs will stay because of how much money it brings to the government. Maybe some things will be hard to dismantle easily because when we made a policy, it's hard to change it. But I'm quite sure that when there will be change, it will be a huge failure from the new US government not to really come back to what is successful for the United States. And I truly believe that successful relationships with countries like Switzerland is one key to the success also of countries like the United States.
Marius Brulat, we have two politicians here with us. We can witness that. What would you expect as an economist from the Swiss government to help those struggling companies, exporting companies at the moment?
Well, I think it's very simple. There are basically three things the government could and should do and is doing. First thing is to continue trying to somehow coax the American president into revising his quite erratic decision. Who knows, it takes a golden fondue caclon in Davos and maybe that will change his mind. So we're all, but I think it's right to try, obviously not by selling your soul, but sometimes it takes, yeah, it's hard to know and you shouldn't stop trying. Second thing is conditional on the tariff staying where it is. Try to protect businesses that are hardly hit, that are hard hit, and the parliament has already taken measures. So they've extended the short-term work compensation monies that are helping furloughed workers staying with their employers. Given the hopefully transitory nature of this policy, that makes perfect sense. Now, should it be extended further? Currently it's at 18 months. Should it be pushed to 24 months or even beyond? That is a discussion that politicians will have. I'm not so sure you should push it beyond 18 months. And then the third thing, and that's probably closest to my heart, Samuel, you said rationality. The seat of rationality in international trade is half an hour down the road from where we're currently sitting. It's called the World Trade Organization with its beautiful headquarters just down the lake in Geneva. And that's really it's actually an American initiative after the Second World War, out of Bretton Woods conference in the US, very much supported over decades and decades, expanded. Currently, more than 160 countries of the world are part of it, nominally the US as well, even though they've broken all the rules, the current government. But as a small player, but that is powerful by holding the seat of this important organization, I think what Switzerland should also do is at every occasion it gets is to raise its voice for rule-based international trade, not infringe its own commitments and hold its trade partners to their commitments, and really show it up when people don't stick to them. And final comment on this, our main trade partner is not the US, less than 20%. Our main trade partner are our neighbors in the European Union, and there's obviously also big decisions coming up, and I think the pendulum has swung a little bit in favor of people who want to really strengthen those links with our immediate neighbors.
First, Laurent Verly, and then Suzi LeVine.
No, I'm completely agree, and not to want to complete economic professor, but I take the last part. I think that in so instability relationship with the US, we need absolutely to confirm the stability with our neighbors, the neighbors which the countries with them we have done most commercial elements, so important for every part of the commerce and industry in Switzerland. That's the relationship with the 27 countries of European Union. We have now a document, a bilateral three possibilities that will come in some months in the parliament and after sure in the population. And so we need absolutely to confirm this stability, especially in such an instability relationship with the states.
Suzi LeVine.
So one of the things, have any of you ever had your information stolen online or gotten a notice from an Equifax or something like that? Raise your hand if that's happened, where they suggest that your information has been breached or from some entity. Well, if your hand's not raised, I'm sorry, it still has. And one of the things that's key to do is to learn from what happened. So if you are, with the Verily Corporation, you know that if the LeVine Corporation gets hit, it's just a matter of time till the Verily Corporation gets hit. And so the key is for Laurent to look at what happened at the LeVine Corporation and shore up your systems. So one of the other things that I think needs to happen is not external, it's internal. And what here in Switzerland makes you all so special, and what could actually, since our foundation, our founding documents are actually quite similar in terms of our constitutions, where are you vulnerable? And where have our vulnerabilities been exploited that you could learn from that? And I'll just give two examples. One is we had a Supreme Court decision called Citizens United that allowed unlimited dark money to go into our elections, which is a profound contributor to where we are today. Does Switzerland have campaign finance transparency? Right. So that's just one example. And so I would encourage you all to do some examining of where there might be vulnerabilities, and also where do you have strengths that might be weakening. One of the ways that's also been really challenging in the United States is the decay in support for public media. And unfortunately, it sounds like there is some pressure on that. And might that pressure also be coming from some funding that you aren't aware of? So I just wonder, are there opportunities to look at some of the roots of what has happened in the United States and where we've been relying on norms instead of codified laws that may also be present here or not, or where you need to shore things up?
I'd like to take a few questions from the audience now, and if we can keep the answers quite short so we can have a few of them. To Laurent Verly, should Switzerland send Albert Rochty to Washington to negotiate the tariffs?
Yeah, with Gianni Infantino, perhaps. Or perhaps I read in a newspaper that we need to have a white man with a strong idea of the white. For me, it's Mr. Parmenin. We don't need Mr. Rushdie. It's the same party, and they are the two white men, and so, no. Perhaps it could be a necessity to have some people who can open some doors. And some doors where we don't think normally, because normally we are going to the door of the commercial Secretary of State of Commerce, Secretary of State of Finance. That's the normal doors we knocking and said, hello, we are Swiss and we want to do something with you. And now we need absolutely to have another doors to knowing and to have people who help us to open these doors. Perhaps Mr. Rushdie can do that. I'm not sure, because in one moment, that's, again, in my meaning, more other people we have to convince and to work with that, especially people who are living and working now in the States, because they are linked already with the Republican or the part of the Republican who are with Mr. Trump. And certainly these people we need to be more in contact, to open the capacity to talk with them. But again, some people said that the first phone from our president with Mr. Trump in April was the best phone of every time. Even a lot of newspaper of the state congrats Mr. Kelasuter to say, you have done a wonderful task with this phone. And in August, that was the worst phone of the world. Perhaps the third one is the better, with Mr. Rushdie or another. I'm not so sure that it's so, again, linked with Swiss people. We need to have more linked, to be not alone, as my colleague said, with people who are in this vicinity of Mr. Trump or friends of Mr. Trump, to have the opportunity to re-engage the discussion. That's perhaps the first next step.
Maybe a question for the two of you. Is that situation also an opportunity to enhance our relationship with the EU and Canada?
Yes. Wanted a short one? No, yeah, I really agree. I think that any relationship that can be strengthened, that will be great anyway. Whatever happens in the US, it's very good for us. And I fully agree. And for that, I can also say thank you to Laurent, while he has fought not so long ago about the Europa dossier and this, in his own party, to convince some people in his own party how important it is to have good relationships with Europe. So I'm very happy that this party has taken that decision recently, thanks to people like Laurent. And I'd like to say, yes, this is crucial for us. Because one thing, when you have risks like Trump, I still believe I don't really care what negotiation strategy is used, because I believe that the outcome is going to be random. The good news is when it's random, it can also be in our favor, but it can also happen in all the... So I don't really care about that. And what I do care is how do we protect us from these kind of risks. And I think the best strategy to protect us against these kinds of risks is exactly to have very strong relationships with the EU, with other countries, Canada, maybe other countries too. And what's very important too is if we do that, I think there will be more of a shield of all the countries who say no to this kind of behaviors, and who maybe, it was not the case last time, but maybe in the future can have the courage to say no when such behaviors come from the US government. Because our hope against this evil as a country and also as Europeans is that we are able not to desolidarize ourselves from each other, but to fight together for something that is way more important than just how much money we may lose, that all these 500 Swiss francs. I think that this democracy today, our democracy that is also threatened by the threat of the media, of the public media, of also the private sector that is bought by oligarchs, all these threats, today there's only one force against it. And that are these people who are in the streets and also in political parties fighting for our democracy. But alone, just Switzerland, we can't do it. With strong partnerships, we can recreate this hope. And today I also learned a bit something, that this hope can not only be created with the EU, but also with all the people who believe in that future in the United States.
You want to? Okay. I think we're going to end this roundtable right here, because we have a second roundtable with very interesting people to listen to. So Thank you so much. You can give a round of applause for all of them. Suzi, maybe last question. I mean, we know how Donald Trump can be sometimes a bit erratic. From everything we've talked about, what is going to remain in 10 years? I mean, is it just, you know, one wave after another, one idea after another? You know how it goes in the Oval Office. What is going to remain from this sequence that we've witnessed since the inauguration day in January?
What is encouraging and going, Samuel, I'm glad that you were happy to feel a little bit of hope coming out of this. I think we're asking some very honest, deep, and important questions about systems that we have been relying on for decades that clearly have vulnerabilities, and that we're actually looking at it. You can't just win by 50.1%. I mean, I guess you can technically, but we can't design a system for 50.1%. And we have to move away from the politics of discontent and division and find a way forward where it isn't about purity tests, but rather about partnership. And in some cases, unlikely partnership. And as Democrats, and I'm using that term Democrats loosely, because there are many Republicans deeply distraught by what's going on. And in fact, I'm involved in a local campaign where the endorsements for this candidate go from a Republican prosecutor to the farthest left member of Congress. And so it's important to understand that we can build these coalitions around certain core values and efforts. And that's what needs to emerge from this, that will be durable, that will be relevant, and that will work into the future and will not be based on legacy systems. I started my career, as was said, at Microsoft and JPL, but Microsoft in particular, where I worked on a technology called MS-DOS. It's from the Jurassic period of computers. But I also worked on Windows 95 and Windows NT. So I understand that at the same time you need to keep some of the legacy systems moving forward and working, you need to be able to displace them and innovate and build new systems. And the same thing has to be true now. And again, the silver lining of what Trump is doing is by decimating all of these systems, it is going to demand of us innovation, creativity, collaboration, patience, and change management for all of those people who are going to be disturbed and displaced by this, and really force us to be more honest about what we represent, who we represent, and how we move forward into the future, and what we want, not just what we don't want.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Suzi LeVine. That is the end. Thank you, everyone. Good evening.